Welcome, everybody, to Glassnet's Early Career Workshop Series. This is Workshop 1 on Proposal Success. Thank you all for joining. I know many of you are part of Glassnet already, but some of you may be new. So first, I just want to let you know who we are. Glassnet is an international network of networks. We're focused on cross-scale and interdisciplinary science on sustainable land and water resources. We're funded by the U.S. National Science Foundation's ExcelNet program. If you are interested in joining Glassnet or just getting on our listserv to hear about more opportunities like this workshop, you can subscribe. There's the link in this presentation, or you can directly chat Holly McIntyre, or if you just Google Glassnet, you might actually get a glass company. But if you Google Glassnet and sustainability, or Glassnet NSF, or Glassnet Purdue, you will find our website, which is here as well. I want to tell you a little bit about today, as well as this workshop series and other Glassnet events that are coming up. So, today is all about proposal success, and we have 3 amazing speakers who are going to talk to us about rather challenging but rewarding proposal types. Our second workshop will be next month on interdisciplinary science, and Jing Liu, who is here as well, will be running that one. Jing, do you want to give just a minute description of what that next workshop will be about?
Yeah. So the date still need to be confirmed with our speakers, but should be roughly late October. And we'll talk about 3 topics: how to come up with successful interdisciplinary research ideas, and how to remove the technical barriers, and finally, how to lead or manage very diverse interdisciplinary research group. Yeah, I hope many of you can still join that one as well. Thank you.
Yeah, and that'll be followed up by a 3rd one in November. This follows a format we've done before with Glassnet workshops called a use case workshop. With our larger Glassnet group, we've done this where researchers submit brief descriptions of research underway that they would like feedback on from the larger Glassnet community, because that includes people of different disciplines working at different scales and from different countries. But here for our early career research workshop series, we'd like to ask for ideas that are not necessarily underway, but that you'd like to start. And if you need to connect with somebody in a different country in particular, and likely in a different discipline as well, would like to help give you feedback from our community on those ideas and how to get them rolling. And then there's follow-up with the potential for travel funding to help do that. So that's where we're heading. And again, if any of that's of interest to you, there are many ways to connect with us. You can go to our website. You can chat directly with Holly here through Zoom to get on our email list, or go to this link to sign up for our email list. And I promise we won't completely fill your inbox. We send a newsletter about once a month and announcements with events like this. Speaking of which, we have a couple upcoming events other than this workshop series. We have a larger Glassnet use case workshop. So that's one of these ongoing research topics where the researchers are asking for feedback and discussion from the community. That'll be October 12th, and you're welcome to register for that as well. It's a really interesting and good topic: land use, land cover change modeling for integrated economic environmental analysis and application to the Amazon region. We're also hosting a session and a town hall at the American Geophysical Union, AGU, fall meeting this December. So I think abstract submissions for the scientific session have already closed, but please come by and hear, if you haven't submitted, you can come by and hear the presentations and attend the town hall. Town halls at AGU are for introducing new groups like Glassnet, and you get to connect with people and meet them in person and hear more about what we're all about. Okay, so finally, while you're all here, is our speaker lineup today is absolutely amazing. We're going to hear about writing interdisciplinary proposals from Dr. Karen Fisher Vanden. We're going to hear about how to do international work from Dr. Nancy Searby. and inclusive proposal from Dr. Suzanne Zurn-Brikhimer. So we're going to start with Dr. Karen Fisher Vanden, and I'm just going to let her, let me stop my slideshow here. And before she begins, stop sharing. So Dr. Fisher Vanden is the Distinguished Professor of Environmental and Resource Economics and Public Policy and the Director for the Institute for Sustainable Agricultural, Food, and Environmental Sciences at Penn State University. She successfully obtained grant funding for large interdisciplinary research teams over many years. In particular, today she's going to be talking about the Program on Coupled Human and Earth Systems called PEACHES, which is a university consortium funded by the University Department of Energy. So Karen, you can take it away.
Okay, let me see, share my screen. Put this in presentation. Okay, you can see that okay? Okay, thanks very much, Danielle. I really excited to have this opportunity. To talk about kind of experiences that I've had in my career, and hopefully, as I'll say, you can learn from my mistakes and my successes. So I'm going to talk a little bit about, obviously, this is on grant writing, so I'll talk about that, but because team building is so important to all of this, before, there's the proposal writing, but there's so much work you have to do to build the team. I thought I would also kind of expand my comments to cover that. So this is just some things I'm going to talk about today. So what I see is the funding trends. And I'd like to hear from maybe Nancy and others and whether they're seeing similar funding trends. My own funding history, building the interdisciplinary team so that you can go after these large interdisciplinary grant proposals, some comments on how on kind of words of advice on writing these interdisciplinary team proposals. And then I think this is something that Jing's going to talk about at the next workshop, but I'm going to have some comments on managing an interdisciplinary team. I thought, this all kind of ties together because managing it comes from proposal writing. So, how successful you are to manage an interdisciplinary team is going to depend on how well you set it up in your proposal. And then just some final comments, the good, the bad, and the ugly. So this is something a colleague said to me at one point, and it really resonated with me, and it sticks with me, is don't learn from your mistakes necessarily. Importantly, learn from the mistakes of others. I think sometimes we focus too much on our own mistakes and we lose the opportunity when you're part of a team to look and say, hey, I really like how they're doing this. And that really didn't go over well, and why. You kind of reflect on those mistakes. So that's something just to keep in mind, going forward. So here's some funding. I tried to do some quick kind of Google searches, internet searches in terms of funding trends. I couldn't quite get the data I was looking for, but I did find a couple sources. But what I've been finding, and some other people on the call can validate this or dispute it, but I think that agencies, it seems from my perspective, that agencies seem to be moving away from holding portfolios that have many small grants, small grants going to a large number of people, to holding portfolios with fewer proposals and large multi-institutional grants. And you can see this, I get a lot of my money from the Department of Energy Office of Science, and you can see this here. So this is just showing, this is the growth in total awards. So their total pool of funding for all awards I'm sorry, I forgot to write this down. This is 2012 to 2021. So it grew by 25%. So their pool of total funding grew by 25%. But the growth in average award given grew by 100%. So what that tells you is that they're funding fewer people, but at much larger amounts. You see this a little bit with NSF. Again, I'm not sure I'm looking at the right data, but it doesn't seem to be as big of a difference here. But at least in the Department of Energy Office of Science, which is where I get my funding, that's something that I've been experiencing too, at least what I've been noticing. So that, when you kind of ask program managers about this, what I've been told is that, they've recognized to generate true interdisciplinary research, requires bringing people and researchers together across disciplines, working together on a common research goal. It used to be when I was first funded by the Office of Science, they had a bunch of us, a lot of people funded at very small amounts, maybe 300K over 3 years. So, you didn't have much. And then they'd have these PI meetings, hoping people would get together and share their work and kind of make connections that way. Kind of not that they're not still doing some of that, but it's now moving to, well, what if we just get all these people together on the same team working together? And then they're forced to go after this common goal. So this requires larger teams, more time, and more money to get it right. So that's at least what I've experienced, what I've seen, and kind of the reasoning that was given to me. So that's what I'm saying here, the last point. So my funding history, I got my PhD in 1999. And the first, it's been a long time. Now I think back, I don't even want to count the number of years there, but the funding in the first 10 years of my academic career averaged about 175K. Maybe there were 2 or 3 year grants, 13 grants. Many of them were small seed grants and multi-year grants. So it wasn't a lot of money in a, kind of in a per year average. But I really looked at this and, kind of reflecting back, these 10 years were really important for relationship building. As I'll mention in the following slide, a lot of the people I work with now are people that I collaborated with on these seed grants and these smaller multi-year grants. So, just because you're starting out and you're getting smaller grants, that's entirely appropriate. That's what you should be doing. You should be building these relationships so that later on you can go after and be successful in these larger grants. So in 2010, this is kind of a turning point, at least for me. NSF and DOE started releasing a number of large grant solicitations targeting large interdisciplinary teams. My first over $1 million grant was in 2010 in collaboration with Danielle's group, UNH, a team that I've been collaborating with ever since. So it's been a good ride, at least with that. After that, we got a large, this is a large interdisciplinary grant, $9 million from the Department of Energy Office of Science in 2010. We also got a $20 million NSF Sustainable Research Network grant in 2012. And then this has continued. We got a $15 million one, building on the one that we got in 2010, on 2016, and then most recently a $17 million Department of Energy's Office of Science in 2021. And all these involve large, multidisciplinary, multi-institutional teams. So I want to kind of just give you just a one slider on my project, on my program, which Danielle's part of this, Tom's part of this, Jing, that we're collaborating on this program on coupled human and earth systems. So as Danielle mentioned, it's a university-based consortium for the multi-sector dynamics program and the Office of Science at DOE. The goal of this program has been to create new state-of-the-art integrated modeling tools. So it's interdisciplinary, you're basically taking many tools from other disciplines and pulling them together to understand multi-sector dynamics. So the fact that something happens in the economic system or something happens in the hydrology, what happens to other sectors, and importantly, risk and response behaviors to those risks. So Peaches involves about 20 investigators, about 10 postdocs. I say about because this is continually in flux. About 15 grad students from these 10 leading research institutions. As I mentioned in the slide before, we've been funded since 2010 by this multi-sector dynamics program in the Office of Science. We started with this $9 million one, and that kind of I say built the team because we already had a lot of relationships with these people, but it kind of got us going, and focused on the analysis and diagnostics of integrated assessment modeling. You've heard that term before. They were very pleased with the work we were doing there. They offered us a cooperative research agreement, which is different from a grant because it's a non-compete agreement with the Office of Science. But the good part is non-compete. The bad part is that they can cut your funding at any point. But what is actually what I do like about it is there's much more interaction with the program managers in the Office of Science to make sure that what we're doing is relevant to their priorities. So we've been funded through cooperative research agreements, this one here in 2016, and now this one that we just got. I wanted to show you, this is the team. There's about 50 of us. So, you know, it's taken a lot of years to pull these people together. A lot of these people, like I said, have been there from the start. A lot, if you notice, a lot of young faces here is because we have a lot of outstanding graduate student, postdocs, research staff that are part of this team. So before you get to the proposal, you have to talk about building the team, which I've been alluding to up until now. So as I mentioned, most people on the Peaches team are people that we have collaborated, that, you know, we've had these connections, these networks, which I love about Glassnet, that you've created this network of people that you've collaborated with and know that you can work well together. So the other piece of advice would be to seek out seed grants, not only, as I mentioned before, capacity building. So that, you know, obviously that's how seed grants are sold, is that, you know, you do this to build capacity, you know, maybe a pilot or something, so that you can go for the, you know, for the larger grant proposals. But importantly, I don't want to underestimate the importance of relationship building in these seed grants. You know, so when you're thinking about going after these seed grants, think about, hey, I'd really like to try out whether I can work with this person, because you certainly don't want to get into a big grant and find out you can't work together, and because that happens, it happens a lot, and it isn't pretty when it happens. So that's what I kind of say here is important to identify people you can work with, and importantly, people who enjoy engaging with other disciplines. That's a biggie. And you're not going to know that unless you have these opportunities in terms of seed grants or smaller grants to know whether these are people who are, really good economists, but you bring them on to a kind of an interdisciplinary project, and all of a sudden you just see that they kind of want to stay in their lane. They really don't want to know anything about the hydrology or the earth system science. They really just want to be told, hey, I will do my part, and then I'm going to throw it over the fence to you guys to do whatever you want with it. You got to identify, it's very, very difficult sometimes to find the people who get excited about learning something about the other person's discipline and other tools. And that's really necessary, because to make those connections, you got to have people who are willing to do that. Seek out opportunities to join multidisciplinary teams and learn from successes and mistakes of others, as I mentioned before, especially in team management. So see, kind of learn, like, hey, this person did a great job managing that team. What did they do that was really key to this? And importantly, decide whether you want to lead an interdisciplinary team or just participate in one. I know I have people on my team who participate in multiple grants, and they're all multiple interdisciplinary grants, and that's their portfolio. In my case, I'm PI, so I've got my hands full. I'm just leading it, and that's all I'm doing. I'm not going after anything else. So you kind of have to decide what your goals are, because in terms of gathering the skills you need to be able to be successful would be different. So getting to writing the interdisciplinary team proposals, there's some key things you want to ask yourself. So the first thing is, why is interdisciplinarity important to the research question you're asking? When you think about, I've been on grant panels, and that's kind of a question we ask. Why is it important that they link? Or are they really, are they really just trying to go after the money, and each one of them are going to do their own separate thing and then write up their own papers? Why is it important to have an interdisciplinary team? Why is that important to the research question? How will you, so in terms of that, that's an important thing to answer in the proposal. The second thing is, how will you connect? This is something that I constantly get hammered on by my own DOE program manager is, he wants to know, okay, how are you, you've got a large team here. How is it going to connect? And he keeps asking that question. And I think it's important, a question to be asking. One thing you might want to think about is, what is the central organizing framework? One thing that I think we benefit from is that we're all modelers. And the whole point of what we're doing is to integrate models. So if you integrate models, you're forced to be interdisciplinary. Like, I'm kind of, this is my wheelhouse over here. I'm an economic modeler. You got Danielle, who's a water balance modeler here. We got to, and there's arrows, how do we connect? So we've created this formally coupled modeling system as part of the Peaches project that forces us to be interdisciplinary. So that's just one thing to think about. Maybe it's not modeling, but what is going to be your central organizing framework? And it's important to articulate that in the proposal. Make sure that everyone on the team is adequately funded. I think at the minimum, you got to give people a grad student and some summer salary to keep them engaged. Else they will have to, because they'll be forced to, find other ways to be funded. Okay, and so now you're talking about people who are not completely invested in your project, and a lot of times they'll try and double dip, not necessarily intentionally double dip, but they'll be saying, well, I can leverage, and that's not necessarily sometimes a bad thing. But if you start to see that they're not really doing what they said they would do as part of the proposal, well, it's because they're trying to fund this grad student and you didn't give them enough money. So they have to have this grad student doing multiple things. And so they're going to try and have one common theme across all these different proposals. Make sure to build in funding for program management and staff. This is really, really important. I didn't do this in the first $9 million, and that was a disaster. We didn't have, because, those of us that are faculty, it's not a full-time job to be managing this large interdisciplinary team. You need to have a full-time staff person who's going to be handling all the program management. And you need to have a solid management plan to ensure that the work stays within scope. So, because at least in terms of our project, we get reviewed every year, and they want to make sure that what we're doing is staying within scope. And importantly, avoid a proposal that reads like a compilation of disparate projects. That's really hard to do, because a lot of times you don't have a lot of time to put together a proposal, and you have to divide and conquer. So you say, everyone write their part, and then you just kind of pull them all together, slap it together, send it in. We have done that, and again, learned from my mistakes. That did not go over well. I have battle scars to prove it. So, they want to know, they can see that a good grant panel, review panel will see that immediately, that, I don't see the connections here, right? So you need to have, even though you have people writing these different parts, you need to have some people pulling it together back and forth in terms of, that doesn't really fit with this person's stuff, and we're trying to connect to this, to what our important research question is. You need to rewrite this. So it needs to be one coherent, well-connected project, or you won't be successful. So I'm just going to mention this quickly. I know that it sounds like Jing is going to do this. This is going to be the focus of the next workshop. But just because this does, how you set up the proposal will help you, excuse me, will define how successful you are in managing it. So one thing is to get funded, it's quite another to be successful in carrying this out. The importance of a well-designed management plan that everybody on the team agrees to when you put in the proposal, so that you can come back later when somebody's kind of going off the rails and out of scope. You can say, remember, this is what we said we would do. We got to keep doing it. You must be willing to work. You must be working in interdisciplinary teams from the start. Again, you can't have people going off and doing their own thing and coming together. You got it with a promise to connect at the end. It won't happen. You got to be working together from the start. Lots of meetings. To be able to do this right, it requires a lot more meetings than usual, because you have to educate each other on your research norms. You got to educate each other on your models, and kind of at what spatial scale, temporal scale, how do we connect? What is endogenous and exogenous to your model and my model? There's a lot of the administrative burden is higher with this. So as part of this also is that you want to create, when you're talking about working in interdisciplinary teams, we all know that the grad students are the engine of this work. Grad students and postdocs. You got to have them working together across the team from the start, rather in isolation. In fact, Danielle, when she was a grad student, and this is way back when, we had her working with my grad student, and I'm sure Danielle, maybe you can speak on that at some point. But that was very important to us being successful in that work, was Danielle working with Isha. So my last slide, and I'm sure I'm over my 15 minutes, so I apologize. So just the good, the bad, and the ugly of doing this type of thing. Working in interdisciplinary teams can be time consuming and frustrating. Let's just be clear, okay? It takes time to learn each other's languages and norms. We had our first grant, we had some fights because of authorship and what was the norm in economics versus the norm in earth system science. Very, very different norms. And it wasn't that anyone was doing anything malicious, but it's just that, oh, I didn't know that's how you guys thought about it. This is how we think about it. You're reliant on others to do their part if you have an integrated project, right? So you may have debugged your part of it, and all of a sudden the other model needs, all of a sudden we identify, oh, yours has problems now. So when you have more models, more uncertainty, more problems. And it's not always conducive to the tenure timeline. Okay, so it takes a long time. It's important, so therefore it's very important to be strategic when you're doing this, to be publishing intermediate work and separate disciplinary work coming out of the project along the way. Be strategic, when you're planning this, not thinking that, well, we're going to go off for 5 years, do the work, then publish. You got to be publishing along the way. But it's incredibly interesting and challenging to do this type of work. Although sometimes it can be difficult to publish, especially in very hardcore disciplinary journals. But very good journals like Science, Nature, ERL, PNAS love this kind of work. In fact, they'll really expect that type of work. So there's, and I think this is the number of journals in this way is growing. So I think the reality is that many of these challenging issues facing agencies are inherently interdisciplinary. They're at the boundary of disciplines a lot of times. And now these agencies are emphasizing interdisciplinary work. Not that they are now, it's been going on for a while now. So you may not be able to avoid it. You may have to, whether or not you want to do interdisciplinary work, you may not be able to avoid it. So it is good to kind of start to think about how to do this type of work and how to think about putting together proposals in this type of area. So with that, I'm going to stop talking. So Danielle, back to you.
Thank you so much, Karen. That was really awesome to hear about. And I know I have many questions. I know a lot of people will too. The way we've designed this workshop, we're going to do all 3 speakers and then questions for everybody afterwards. So all of you with burning questions, please hold them and ask them at the end once we get through our next 2 presentations. All right, so next, we're very excited to hear about international research from Dr. Nancy Searby. Dr. Searby has extensive experience connecting research activities, data, and science products across countries. She directs NASA's SURVEYOR program, which works in over 40 countries and helps developing countries use satellite data to address critical challenges in food security, water resources, weather and climate, land use, and disasters. She's also the director of NASA's Applied Remote Sensing Training Program, RSET, which reaches participants from over 170 different countries. So thank you so much, Nancy. And with that, I will turn it over to you.
Great, thank you. I'll share my screen. Okay, can you see and hear me all right?
Yes, thank you.
Can you hear me?
Yes, thank you. Can you hear us?
I can. Excellent.
Yeah,
All right,
great.
so make sure. Great. Yeah, thanks for inviting me to this, and it was great to hear the lessons learned on the interdisciplinary projects. I might touch on a couple of those things. So I'm coming at this from a different perspective, right? So I work at NASA, and I am what you would call one of those funders that you were just hearing about before. And so I'm going to give you kind of a rapid fire view of the world from NASA. So what I'm going to talk to you about is just really about our main mechanism to be able to propose science. That's ROSES, Research Opportunities in Space and Earth Sciences. And then give you a couple of examples of international solicitations I personally have been involved in, developing and creating and selecting, and then give you just a rapid fire list of other useful early career resources in case they're useful. And hopefully I'll share these slides because they have links that you might be able to use. So real quickly, so NASA not only launches humans into space, which is what most people think of us as, and we're all excited to get Artemis 1 off the ground, but we also do science. And so we do science in Earth, heliophysics, that's the sun, planetary, including our own, obviously with its own Earth sciences, astrophysics, and biological and physical sciences. And so if you're interested in proposing to NASA, it's always good to understand our science plan and our priorities as you're thinking about that. We have different kinds of NASA solicitations. I won't spend too much time talking about any of these, just to make you aware at this broader landscape. So we build satellites, right? Missions and instruments. So those are called announcements of opportunities, or AOs. We also do research. And so that's the ROSES call we've talked about, which you'll hear mostly about. And we have lots of different kinds of research that we call for. We also do technology, data systems, education, and even some special things like airborne instruments. And then finally, we have these new kinds of missions that we have been working on to try to get better at cost and schedule management and getting more innovation. And venture class is a kind of solicitation that lets you select suborbital and airborne investigations, complete missions, and spaceborne instruments. And you can see the dollar values vary quite a lot there. So how do you work with NASA, and what about this international question? So just briefly overall, you can see it's really important. You know, I guess that's proposal writing 101, make sure you've read the solicitation. And then you can contact your program officer. You heard the importance of the relationship from the previous speaker, and it does help to get to know the program officers. Get to know NASA through our web pages, learn how to write proposals. And if you're a new investigator, sometimes you can be a co-investigator, say with a NASA Center Science in that area. And then just other areas to think about is the kinds of things like data analysis and writing code. So ROSES is called ROSES because NASA just loves their acronyms. And you can see that there's a superposition of a rose picture into the sky there. And we do release it on Valentine's Day. So you're getting a rose on Valentine's Day. So we have a bit of a sense of humor in our science group. And you can see that we have different appendices in this main call for the different discipline areas. Each appendix contains many different individual program elements, each with its own due date and each with its own topic. The proposals can range from 5 to 15 pages. We do peer review. The word size are quite small to quite large, although it's interesting to hear about the interdisciplinary cooperative agreement large scale. We do that, but perhaps not as much as Department of Energy. So that's interesting to hear about. And then you can see that as much as we try to reach a large group of people, we fund mainly universities, although they do go to other parts of the research enterprise as well. So just a little bit about earth science as we are zooming in. This year, the 2022 Roses Call has 53 different elements in it. And we kind of divide our world into research and analysis. That tends to be the more basic research. That was one block on the framework diagram of the interdisciplinary study that you just heard about. And then we have applied sciences. How do you take that knowledge and apply it for better decisions and actions for society? And so you can see the list of topics there. Again, more technology and data systems. One thing to note, within NASA, we are not allowed to fund international investigators, but we do have a topical workshop, symposium, conferences call in our solicitation, and you are allowed to bring international participants to the table in those. And then at the bottom here, you see the 2017 decadal. Again, NASA gets advice every 10 years, why decadal, from the community. And that community tells us what they believe our priorities should be. So it's always good to know what we were told. We try to be responsive to them. So now I'm going to give you two examples of international calls, international programs that I'm involved in, and just tell you a little bit about how we've thought about the solicitation and things you can think about if you were to be interested in this particular kind of work. So SERVIR is as a joint initiative of NASA and the U.S. Agency for International Development. We do work in Asia, Africa, and Latin America, and use satellite data and geospatial technology to co-develop, very important word, co-develop, innovative solutions through a network of regional hubs. So the thing to note that if you were to pull open the SERVIR Applied Science Team solicitation, which we just awarded our next applied science team, they're not quite out there. You can't read about them quite yet, but the selections have been made. We're getting ready to post it on our website, and the team will start in January, 4th time of selecting this team. And we just focus on regions. So really important to kind of understand the framework of how the organization of the program that you're applying to works. And so in this particular case, the theory of change of SERVIR is all about working with regional hubs within regional institutions, hub being kind of just a team within that institution that have recognition and buy-in from member countries. And you can see the 5 regions that we're working in. And these letters, I apologize for all the acronyms, I'll just say one of them. The Regional Center for Mapping of Resources for Development, or RCMRD, is an organization that is in Kenya who has a government mandate to support 20 different countries in Eastern and Southern Africa to address their use of Earth observations for decisions and actions. And so they're our partner in that region, and they are funded by USAID, and we fund the scientists to work with them, and so on through each of these areas. So the other thing to be aware of is that we focus on themes. And so we have these 4 different service areas: agriculture and food security, water resources, land cover, land usage change, and weather and climate. And then we focus on countries. And so I'm just pointing this out as an example of things to really pay attention to as you're reading a solicitation, because all the time we put down these countries that we're interested in because these are our focus. And then someone will come along and say, well, I'm proposing in country Y that's not on this list. And so it is important just to pay attention and read the solicitation. You can always reach out to the program officer and say, hey, are you interested in that research? And sometimes if it's in 2 countries, overlapping, adjacent, that one of the countries is, we'll consider that work. So the last thing I wanted to say about this particular program is that we co-develop. I mentioned that was a really important word. It's really important to think about knowledge sharing, because often those locally on the ground in an international project have much better understanding of their local context than we will ever get sitting in the United States. So it is so important that you co-develop and work together in an equal, respectful way. Maybe that'll come into the inclusion conversation coming up soon, with the partners that you're working on the project. And so this particular one just shows one where we were working with them to develop crop maps that helped protect 425,000 Kenyan farmers. And was working with the government of Kenya to, who had created a pilot insurance program for one county to help the farmers. But they were collecting field data in the old-fashioned way of like walking around the fields. And so we helped them integrate satellite data into that to reduce the cost of data collection for each county by 70%. So that's just an example of a co-development project where we worked together to really understand what was needed. They had their knowledge, we had our knowledge, we brought it together and helped save money. So how do we accomplish this within this program? We, within, at my level and with the leadership team, struggled at first to get a good solicitation design that allowed buy-in from the regional partners and the national partners, as well as bringing the best and most appropriate science to meet the needs in the region. And I say that because often you don't necessarily need the brand new thing that we're not quite sure is the model's going to be the best thing yet. You really need some maturity on the science before you're ready to apply it. So what we came up with was this two-step process that's working quite well for us, where we ask proposers to submit 5-page step 1 proposals. Often that's used when you know you're going to get a lot of proposals. So it helps save time both in the review of those, as well as it helps the proposers save time because it's easier to write a smaller proposal. But for us, it's also because we are then able to down select and then ask that down selected group to work directly with the regional hub point of contact identified. And then they become a collaborator on that step 2 proposal. So that allows the co-development of the ideas and the proposed work in an equal and respectful way, and allows them to have the proper uptake in the region. So here's a key piece of our program is that it's NASA and USAID funding both, so that we have USAID funding those regional hub points of contact so that they do have the resources to actually work with us to do these proposals and to be part of the team. Switching gears, I'll talk about another program, international program that I'm involved in, the High Mountain Asia Team, or HIMAT. This one encompasses the 13 countries. You can see the image there showing the geography that the work covers. And this is an interdisciplinary program, and we are asking these scientists to work together. But interestingly, we are not using a cooperative agreement, and we are not asking for a single proposal. In fact, we get separate proposals. And then everybody gets together and comes up with a better integrated work program. So maybe I should learn something from DOE. But anyhow, that's the way we're doing it. In this particular solicitation, it's actually jointly run by the research and analysis side of the House, which is our more basic research group, as well as applied sciences, which is where I'm from. And I help co-lead this effort with Jared Enton from the Water Cycle Group. And so just, again, focusing on integrated open science with both basic and applied research, it is a challenge to integrate across those different science perspectives, as well as we are asking those teams to work together and develop a framework like you saw in the last presentation, so that the models at the regional scale down to the more national scale work together, looking at glacier, snow, permafrost, and precipitation, and also to improve our understanding of the downstream changes like water resource and induced impacts. Second round, we were really working towards projection space. We're in the middle of this second round right now, and we really are working towards open source science. And so this team has really been piloting the best ways to do that, and also focusing on transdisciplinary approaches. So I think that we had some specific requirements. Again, just making the point that you really should pay attention to the solicitation. We needed tools to be interoperable. That would be the model outputs and with the glacier melt toolbox. And the idea being a gathering of the tools, including model outputs as well as models. And again, that interdependency of the work and everybody working cooperatively, and when somebody gets behind, it affects your own work is still all very true here in this, but it is focused on an international context. So just real quickly, as most funding institutions, we do have standard criteria: intrinsic merit, relevance, and cost realism. We focus on making sure we're doing more and more in the area of implicit bias and inclusion, trying to make sure that we're doing our best fair review using a 5-point scale. And as early career people, I do suggest, if you have never worked on a review panel, it is so insightful to be able to do that. And so we do have a place where you can volunteer. It helps you understand how people review proposals. You might be surprised, if you haven't ever done that before, how little time each proposal gets and how quickly it goes. And it makes it really clear that you really need a well-written, very, very clear proposal. So out of those two use cases, here are some suggestions for international proposals. Understand that international research is substantially different than the US, that the needs are different, capabilities are different. And again, make sure that you go in with the attitude of sharing your knowledge and learning local knowledge. Co-capacity building is important. And then find those local or regional research organizations to collaborate. Perhaps through this network of networks that you're all participating in, you are already working on that. But it is important to have local collaborators. And then, you know, in our world, we run into this challenge of, you know, what some people call extractive science, where scientists come from another region into a different region and ask for data, take data, and don't work together with those in that place. And so it's really important to seek meaningful collaboration and realize that information flow goes both ways. And then ensure active collaboration and co-design with your international partners. In our work, again, we are really, NASA is working on transform to open source science. It's a big push right now, and it's required in all our future work. So if you don't know about open science, learn about it, learn how to do it, and make sure that if you're working with an international team, that you share everything, including the publications being joint. And then this try to work yourself out of a job is something particular for Severe. It really is a co-capacity development program. So the idea is to really leave sustainable capacity in the region and move on to the next need, so that those folks have the knowledge they need to be able to make their decisions. Focus on the needs of the region and the country, and build your research around that rather than trying to fit your proposal. It's all the question of, do you listen to the needs and then tailor your work, or do you have your toolkit and you try to find a way to apply it to the needs? So there's a bit of an iteration there, but what's really important is that you start with the needs and you adapt to address those. And then we at NASA cannot fund non-US researchers. And so, as I said, with Severe, we have this complementary funding with USAID that allows our hub institutions to get resources to work together. Within the context of USAID, there's another program called PEER, Partnerships for Enhanced Engagement in Research, that allows non-US investigators to propose. I'm not sure that they have an open call now, but it's something to keep an eye out. And if that program changes, there might be other opportunities similar to that. So beware. And then we also participate in other networks like IAI, which is an international funding network in the Latin American context. So I'm sure there are other kinds of networks that you can join up with that have the resources for the non-US investigators. Really quickly now, I know I've used almost my time. I'm going to give you a rapid fire view of other things early career folks might be interested in. So there is a Future Investigators in NASA Earth Science and Space Science Technology Finest solicitation that allows early investigators to propose. We also have a new investigator early career program in Earth Sciences that will next be solicited next year. We have a NASA postdoctoral program that you can look into. We have Develop, which is also a program under my responsibility where students, recent graduates, early career and transitioning career professionals work under the advice of science advisors on interdisciplinary projects with users and on a project together. We have an airborne program called SARP, Student Airborne Research Program. We have the Office of Science, Technology, Engineering, and Math internship program, the Pathways program. Jet Propulsion Lab has their own program. GLOBE is a educator and senior citizen scientist program, and a couple of other citizen scientist programs. And last but not least, I just wanted to share about RSET. That is our Applied Remote Sensing Training Program, as mentioned under my responsibility. If you're interested in earth sciences and want to know more, you can find lots of training opportunities there that are free and open, and the trainings are live, but we also record them and they're available for you to look at on demand after the fact. So go take a look if you have any interest in those particular trainings. That's it. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much. That was an excellent overview. And I really appreciate thinking about how this is an early career focused workshop. That was perfect. So as before, let's hold our questions. We have one more speaker that we're really excited about. We're going to hear from Dr. Suzanne Zurn-Brikhimer. She's the Associate Director of the Purdue University Women in Engineering Program, the past Deputy Director of Purdue's NSF Advance Initiative, and a founding advisory board member of the Geoscience Alliance. She's a long-term researcher in the field of understanding barriers and pathways to success for typically marginalized groups in STEM, which is why we're really happy to hear her talking about how to be inclusive in our proposals and our work. So Suzanne, over to you.
Thank you, Danielle. So I'm going to share my screen. Okay, can you see that screen? Okay.
Yes.
Okay, now we're going to see if it advances. We had some trouble here earlier. I had some trouble. So I'm going to talk about developing research partnerships, and in particular, the experience I have is working with Indigenous communities in the U.S. So I'm going to frame it around that, but I think hopefully some of the things I talk about can be used in different communities around the globe. So did we advance there? Okay, yeah. Great. So the need, right? So sustainability challenges pose unique impacts to different communities, right? We all realize that. But research into those impacts and the related solutions needs to include perspectives from the diverse communities. And both Karen and Nancy touched on that, how important it is to get feedback from this community. So to gain this perspective, work needs to be done in partnership with the community. And as Nancy said, we can't just walk in with our Western science academic hat on and say, this is what we're going to do here, because the communities need to have buy-in and they understand the needs better for their community than we do. So a little bit about the people, the Indigenous people. The graphic on the right there is from the firstpeoples.org website. And the brownish burgundy part shows Indigenous territories constitute 20% of the Earth landmass, but 80% of the world's remaining biodiversity. So it's very important, I believe, in our sustainability efforts that we partner with these communities to do our work. So Indigenous people have a deep connection to the place, the culture, and the ways of knowing, and the deep connection to their lands that, as Western scientists, that we need to appreciate that. So to develop any type of lasting research effort, their voices must be heard, the voices of the people in the community. And we need to build partnerships built on authenticity and trust so that we can actually make an impact, and not an impact as a Western scientist, but an impact as a human and how we are impacting the earth. So all that is very important. So how do we go about doing that? I'm going to talk about a framework called the 6 R's. This framework was first developed in the early 1990s, and specifically actually developed for Indigenous scientists to work within their communities and bring in Western scientists to work. But they have found, and we have found, that it works really well for Western scientists to understand and work under this framework to be respectful of the community that they're working in. So the first 4 R's came out in the early 90s. So it was respect, responsibility, relevance, and reciprocity. And through that, working over a couple decades, they realized all of these kind of form this big relationship. And Karen touched on it really early on, how important relationship building was. And then in about 2012, research came out talking about representation, which in my opinion is actually one of the most important things, but we didn't name the R until like 2012. And so I'm going to talk about these 6 R's in the context of working with Indigenous communities in the US, like I said, but you can use this across the globe. And I chose to talk about it this way so that those of you interested in working with Indigenous communities or local communities have references you can go back on after this talk and read about it for yourself. And so I have a couple of the references at the bottom of the slides, and here's one of them. That would be a really good one. Came out in 2022, just recently, in the Frontiers in Psychology. So let's talk about these 6 R's just a little bit. So relationship. This is the first one. And the foundation for everything we do. So what I wrote is building trust and good relationships is fundamental, requires attention and effort to build and maintain. And it's a lot of effort and a lot of attention. And the first little background with me and my work, the first community where I worked with was in northern Minnesota, Red Lake Nation. And I have a history with another Indigenous nation in Minnesota. My dad actually grew up on a reservation. And so I'm part Native American, but not involved in the culture and the everyday life of Indigenous people. And so when I decided that I wanted to work with Native communities, I had to reach out and start making connections. And it took the better part of 2 years of talking to one individual at a time and building a relationship where they could trust me with the program that I wanted to do. What we have seen too many times is Western scientists walk in and say, I have this great thing. I'm doing research on soil, for example, and I have this great model and I want to come in and do research on your land. And that's not the way to go about it, right? There's no trust building. There's no relationship building there. So the main important part, if I can't stress this enough, is to take the time and the effort to build that relationship, understand the community, do your own research on that community. What has been going on? Why is that community where it is? In the US, right, the federal government decided where Native American reservations are located. Why did they pick those lands and what is on that land? Really understand that before you go out and try to build these relationships. So relationship building, first R. The next 4 R's I talk about all stem from relationship building. So respect, respecting the knowledge, respecting their tradition, their core values, their worldviews, their cultural integrity, understanding in the US the connection that the Indigenous people have with the land, that land is Mother Earth. And so if you are going on the land, on native lands and you're taking core samples, right, that matters to them. That matters how you treat that soil, what you do with the soil, and how you return the soil back to them, right? So there's taking the time to build that understanding and asking questions, understanding that connectedness with the earth and place is very, very important. And you can't do that overnight, right? So this is building the relationship. So we have respect for our partners, responsibility, and that's really, they call it in one of the references is community obligation, that you're working with the communities instead of for the community. And Nancy alluded to this in her talk as well, that you're not going in, they don't need your help, necessarily want your help. You're not going in, saving this community. You are working with them in partnership and respecting that again. And that comes from building that relationship. Representation. So the best way to understand what they need in their community is to have the community's voices heard. So through your relationship building, you need to get people from that local community, that Indigenous community on your team, so their voices can be heard. So you can understand through their eyes, through their traditional knowledge that they have of the land, is what they need, what is relevant to them. A lot of times we see scientists that they think their model or whatever they have developed is the best, greatest thing, and they want to go use that in this land, in this community. Well, the community doesn't think it's relevant for them. So you really need to take the time ahead of time to find out from their representation what is relevant, what is important, what they need to work on, what they want to work on. And then this also goes into relevance. You're not going to understand the relevance, what is meaningful for the community, until you get representation and their voices being heard. And a really important part of relevance, the needs of the community, is that the research, that last sentence I have, their research should be approved by, kept within, and given back to the community. So things that are removed from the community, for example, I did a soil and an earthworm study. When we got back done testing all of the worms, we got testing the soil, we brought it all back to the community and placed it back where we have taken it from. So understanding that, right? Understanding what is relevant to the community, what they expect in return, and given honor to the land you're working with and the community that you're working within. So we have the 6 R's, right? So I've talked about 5 of them, but the relationship building is the core of what you do. And you do that through respect, responsibility, representation, and relevance. And the last R is reciprocity, and understanding that you have respectful knowledge sharing, that we share our ideas, our Western science with the Indigenous community or the local community, and that we learn from each other. And Nancy, hit on this exactly, is that you are learning from the people in that community because they're the ones with the knowledge of the land. They're the ones with the knowledge of their own community. So those are, I might talk short here. Those are the 6 R's. And I drew this graphic too, if more people are more visual learners, with relationship at the beginning, at the core, at the center of everything that you do. Karen started that, like her second sentence, she said, with building relationships with interdisciplinary teams. And from that relationship building, that takes time and effort. You build that respect, you bring in their representation, you understand the responsibility to the land, and you understand the relevance of the local community to the work that you do. And finally, it's the reciprocity, is that you are a team and you're working in partnership. We are not walking in as Western scientists and saying, this is what we're going to do, and this is what we're going to do here, and here's my grant, and I'm going to walk out with a couple publications and a talk at a conference, right? We're learning from them, they're learning from us, and it's a continued relationship that you build on year after year, and keep developing that relationship. So I kept my talk short so that if people have questions, we can go back and ask some questions about that.
Oh, thank you so much, Suzanne, and thanks to all the speakers. That was amazing. So before we move on to questions, a little housekeeping. For those of you who are participating, Holly just put a link in the chat. We have 4 very short questions for feedback for us. So sometime before the end of this workshop, if you could answer those, so we know how we're doing in putting together these workshops, that would be great. Thank you. So now it's time for questions, and we're going to open it up. If you want, you can ask a question to a specific speaker. You can ask a general question. Also, speakers, you can ask questions of each other, and we really want to hear, hopefully you'll all be able to chime in on the questions, because I imagine, and as you guys identified already, these things are all so related to one another, and a lot of the advice has been similar across the different topics. I would invite people to use the Zoom function to raise your hand and ask your question out loud. But if you prefer, you're welcome to type it into the chat, and I can ask it for you if you'd like. Just if it's in the chat, be sure to say, is this for a specific speaker or for everybody? And I'll just give a minute and see if anyone raises their hands before I jump in with my own many questions. Well, I'll get the ball rolling. I know there's more questions, but so this goes to the relationship piece of it that many of you, I think all of you touched on, which is, so as a new investigator, it seems sort of intimidating that I'm going to go approach people, whether they be someone from a different discipline, someone from a different culture, someone, who's a program manager, someone in a different country, all these things. Like, how do you how do you decide to make that approach? Like, I'm going to pick this person or this community that I want to connect with. And then, what advice do you have? I mean, Suzanne just gave amazing advice, but, how do you start that conversation? What do you tell them about yourself? What is the question you're asking? Like, how do you get the ball rolling on relationships you think you want to start? And say any of you, three of you can jump in and help me here.
Well, I can start that discussion.
Thanks.
I think it's for me, what I did to work with Indigenous communities is I reached out to an institution that was by the community, and so in the U.S., right? So I found an institution, and they had a Native American center, and I reached out to that director, the Native American Center. I introduced myself, a little bit about my background, why I was interested in that particular community to work in, and if I could meet with that individual, the director of the Native Center. And we talked 3 or 4 times before in person. We talked on the phone, we talked via email, and then I went physically there to meet them in person. And it was 3 or 4 times before he was comfortable bringing me onto the reservation and introducing me to their scientists there. So when I talk about, again, with Indigenous communities, building that trust. So he took the time to kind of make sure that he felt I was trustworthy and that my intentions were good, so that he would use his connections to extend that invitation onto the reservation. And we met with the reservation 3 or 4 times before any research started. And if you think about that, right, you can't read a solicitation that comes out in February. Let's say Nancy's comes out on Valentine's Day, and maybe it's due in September. That doesn't give you enough time to build this relationship. And we've seen that error made a lot of times by researchers, that like, I have a deadline, like I want to work, I got to get broader impacts in my grant. So I want to work with Indigenous community, and that my grant, this work I do would be wonderful with this community. And they don't take the time to build that relationship, and they just hop right in. Well, it may take you a year to even get on that land, or, within the community. So you have to it's building a relationship. Karen said she worked for 10 years with different groups before she really built that relationship. We do it in academia on trust with other academics, and we understand the academic language and the academic culture, which is very different than the culture in the local community. So taking that time and knowing that the time you're putting in isn't for tomorrow's grant or the grant that's in 2023, it might be a few years out, but that builds the relationship and the trust. So that was like a long answer, but getting into finding that one individual that maybe can introduce you to these communities.
Yeah, thank you. That's a helpful answer. Yeah, Karen, I was hoping you'd speak up.
Yeah, that was excellent, Suzanne. I was kind of nodding. Yes, exactly. Because I was trying to, when you asked that, Danielle, I was then trying to reflect on how, not only how I did it, but also when people approach me, what works. And so a couple things. First of all, if I think back on who I work with, a lot of people I went to graduate school with, like they're kind of the same cohort. So that is because sometimes when you're trying to go for the best person in the field, senior person, these are people who already are pretty, their bandwidth is pretty low at this point. They've got lots of other grants and they're not looking to take anyone else on. So, I guess the first thing that I did was kind of look to people I know I work well with and see if we want to go. And it seems like that would be the inclination of everyone here at the call, would be to go with people that you currently already have a relationship with and things like that. But I love what Suzanne said was think forward. If you know that there's an agency that has this solicitation every year, and at some point you want to go after that, start building that relationship. Maybe ask the person to give a seminar for, and get to, come visit your campus or give a Zoom seminar and just start that relationship building rather than, I've had so many people come to me, like Suzanne, you said it, last minute, oh, we need an economist on this proposal, is going in 2 weeks. Can we put you on it? No, I don't know you. I don't know if I even want to work with you. It's something that you need to have that relationship. So, and the last thing I would say, and again, I think I'm just reiterating what Suzanne said, but just in a different context, is, use your networks. Like if if a colleague of yours knows somebody and you can have them introduce you or introduce you, or you can drop a name, say, hey, I know your work because I work with so-and-so and they think highly of you, bringing that into it. So rather than it just looking like it was, oh, you're the best person in that field and I'm going to go after you, but everybody else does too, using those networks. So, it sounds, I don't know, it sounds involved, and Suzanne just, I think, really articulated that well. It takes time. So the more that you can look forward is like, ultimately, I want to go after this grant. It's going to take me some time to build those relationships. Get going on that and figure out ways, to just ask them if, hey, you're going to be at AGU. Can we have coffee? I really like your research. I'd really like to talk to you about your research. And then you meet with them and then say, hey, there's a solicitation that comes out every year. Is this something you or somebody in your team would be interested in being involved in? That type of thing. So I'm going to stop because maybe Nancy has some things to add to that.
I'll make a small addition to both of your great additions. I think, local community, academic partner. I think the only thing I'd add is for sure AGU is the big science conference, so networking there is huge. But if you're interested in working in a particular application area, then go to the conference of that application area. Go to where that local community gets together and has their own conversations. And so I do think, building the relationship, there's that old adage, in an emergency, you don't want to have to look up somebody's phone number, right? You really need that relationship in advance of all of that. So I think if you're interested in that more applied and working with user communities, finding places, I actually have participated in an Indigenous webinar, and they said, come to our baseball games, come to our family of gatherings, come be with us a lot, and then we might talk to you. Because there are a lot of people who just drop by, right? So that's all I just add.
Thank you. Yeah, it's really useful too to hear the discussion across the three of you. I feel like I'm getting an amazing master course here. And there is a question in the chat, but first, Famara, did you have your hand up? Would you like to ask a question?
Thank you, Danielle. Thank you to all the presenters. I am Famara of and just wanted a little more insight into of the proposal. Often proposal timing is very short. I wonder how, with your experience, you've gone with that co-development process with the communities that you'll be working with. And sometimes it's like after the grant is awarded, that's the time the relationship building starts. I think the relationship building should be included in the very beginning of the proposal writing, before the grant is awarded or before the concepts are put together. So I'm just interested and how the funder, whether it's NSF or it's NASA, how they look at those components of relationship building, code design, and incorporate it in the proposal before them funded, depending on the topic, I guess. But yeah, thank you.
Thanks, Famara. I don't know if any of the speakers want to take a first crack at that. And there was a little bit of difficulty with the audio, but I think, Famara, what you're asking is, how do the agencies deal with both the timing, that long lead up it takes to build a relationship, and how in the proposal review process can they evaluate your, did you do a good job with that relationship building? And I think Nancy, as our program officer here, would you like to give a first answer to that?
Sure. I wish I had a really good answer. I don't. I think it's a great question. If I talk about the two international projects that I talked about, if I go to that context, I mean, one of the values of our Surveyor program is it's been going for 15 years, right? And therefore, we've been able to keep long-term relationships and trust. Even as individuals leave organizations, we're able to keep the relationships going. So I think I think a contemplation, maybe Karen has had the same experience where, because she's had this repeated cooperative agreement funding, you've been able to keep a long-term relationship. I think that when you have the funding cycle that we tend to do, which is that 3-year grant cycle or 4-year grant, it's a hard thing. It's a really hard thing. And I actually think it's a challenge back to us as the funders to think about that. I'll just say I just have a new area of equity and environmental justice as my portfolio. And we just funded 39 new projects, which is super exciting. Little guys, not like big Karen projects, but little guys. Landscape analyses, feasibility studies, and data integration projects. But I'm right in the middle of reviewing the proposals, knowing that there were different levels of engagement and ability to engage. And then how do you bring the skills where our science communities don't necessarily have that skill? How do we help them develop that skill? And then on the inclusion front, we also asked them for inclusion plans. And it was real clear that there's a large understanding and ability in how to be inclusive. And so I think myself as a program manager, I'm right this very moment thinking about how do I help those who want to do this kind of work, but don't know how. So please in the chat, share any resources you have and ideas of how you help that relationship building. And then how do you measure that you've been successful? I think being able to leave the work and see the work sustain, and at least within the context of Surveyor, is an important part of that. But just yesterday, having that conversation on one of our projects that's from the 3rd round and making sure that we have a sustainable uptake, it's work.
I'll just jump in on a couple of things. First of all, I've been on I've been on NSF review panels, and you can tell, I don't know, Nancy, I'd love to hear your thoughts on this. You can tell when these people don't know each other. It's just written to themselves. These people have never worked together. Like you can tell, and they haven't spent the time over the last year building that relationship because they're disparate ideas that are not connected. So at least as a review panelist, that's one thing I've noticed. The other thing I just want to add to this in terms of relationship building, and this means, I don't know how this is going to come off, but one thing that I have done and others on my team have done when we think about bringing somebody into the project, you do a little reconnaissance to ask, others, is this person easy to, like, oh, I know that they worked with so-and-so. And so you kind of find out through your channels, is this person a good person to work with? It's important to kind of do that kind of research to find out, because you do want to know a little bit about, is this person a team player, somebody who's really good, but maybe not somebody who enjoys interdisciplinary work, that type of thing is really important to kind of do your homework on. And I don't, maybe that doesn't come off right, but I know that we've done that. All
right, Jane?
Yeah, I just when Karen was saying she was on the review panel, so I just came up this question, like since all the speakers probably you have enough experience to review lots of proposals. So what are the not very good, so not to do things you see immediately, so you can give some advices to the early career, so don't do that in your proposal any ever.
I'm gonna jump off on one point from Jing's question. And kind of my other hat that I wear is I work with the Women in Engineering program here at Purdue. And all too often during NSF Career Award time, we will get an email that says, we want to work with the women in engineering students since women are underrepresented, and I need a letter of support and it's due tomorrow. And that's all we get. And no relationship building, no funding included for the broader impacts that they want to do. Like that was their whole broader impacts, was to say, I got a letter from Women in Engineering. And, you know, it's like, we can't do that. Like, you know, we're busy all the time already. So partnering up with the faculty, like we need a year in advance to talk about what we would do, why it's right for you to work with our program. We need funding to buy supplies or to, you know, run an event or to do whatever it is. So I think part of that for an early career researcher is look around your institution if you want to partner with underrepresented groups. So for women, you know, in STEM, or if it's like a minority engineering program, minority science program, minorities in agriculture, and start that early, like in the process. And when you actually write your broader impacts, there needs to be funding to go into there. And so that's what I have seen in NSF proposals is, you know, it's a superficial broader impact if there's no funding associated with it. And they don't even dedicate a half of their 15 pages to what that is. So again, it's relationship building early.
Thank you. That's a very good advice. Other speakers, do you have any like advices for us to avoid the mistakes?
Yeah, I think my one slide, I tried to get at those don'ts, which was you make sure you have a coherent, as Suzanne said, a coherent story, a well-connected project that really does show that people are well-connected. Just like I say, the times that I've been on panels when there wasn't a good reason for why you needed to bring such a large team together, to answer a certain question, when that wasn't clear, and it was maybe that, they were just being opportunistic, that it was, hey, we already want to do this, and here's a program that maybe we could shoehorn into, but really they're looking for interdisciplinary, and what we're not really proposing is not. So they got to answer that question. And then, again, that connection, like how are these different pieces going to be connected? We all know doing interdisciplinary work is difficult. So you got to be thinking, I don't know. One thing that we've always struggled with is what will happen. I think somebody else said this, but what happens during the proposal? How much do you have to figure out before you write the proposal? How much you're going to figure out after you get the money? The more that you can look like you're a connected, well-connected team that has an ongoing relationship, because as a reviewer, you want to know whether this is going to be successful, right? And the way that you get evidence of it being successful is that they have had success working together before. They have really put the time into thinking about the management of this and how in the process, kind of a Gantt chart of what you're going to do in each one, how they're going to be connected. I think all that kind of measures or evidence that this is going to be successful is really something key that I actually key on when I review proposals. I'm looking at that. So those are some random thoughts beyond what I think I already said.
I'll just add that I think that as a early career person, it's really important to know the field and know what's already been done. So do your research, often you're asked to write a review article so that helps you get there. But I think really I've seen some naivete and some ideas sometimes where they haven't done that work to really understand the field and what's already been done so that their work is really making a difference. And then in the applications area, I think that I can say that we get proposals sometimes from people who aspire to do that, but don't really know how to do that. And so getting a chance to work on a project with someone else that gives you some experience in that, more working with a partner, a user, a local community, or really understanding the decision context as compared to the pure science. We at NASA have a guidebook out there to help people bridge that, but I do think in our particular area, that's something that I'm not sure. I'd be interested, since you're both from Purdue, do you really teach that? How students coming through the degree, do they learn how to do some of these skills-based work of working with communities and really thinking about decisions and action? So oftentimes, as you said, your work of IDS is hard to publish. Also, sometimes in the reward system, it's not well rewarded either in the career development. So I think as a young person, I think thinking through where you can get those experiences and who you might work with, particularly if you feel like that's what you want to work.
Thanks. So we've got a couple questions in the chat, and I'm actually going to go to the last one first because it touches on some of what Nancy just said. So Jessica is asking, as we've been discussing, building relationships takes time and effort. How would you recommend balancing this with meeting research deliverables? Going on, she's acknowledging Nancy's answer to the last question and the fact that academic culture hasn't necessarily caught up with the fact that the work requires substantial effort. And she also wanted to note that she's been on review panels where they cannot explicitly mark down a proposal because of poor team connectedness or not well-planned broader impacts. That was a long question, but and Jessica, feel free to chime in if you want to clarify or restate that better than I've said it.
I'll just pop in there first, since I think that you need, if your early career, you're working in a broader context. I don't know where you are working, if you're at a university setting or elsewhere, but I think you need a supportive set of leadership. And that's a challenge to all of us to really support the fact that, in fact, we believe in applied work and we believe in the relationship building part of that work, and we reward that part of the work. I think I challenge myself. I know we in applied sciences talk about that here at NASA, to challenge our academic partners too, to think about that. How do you say, yeah, actually you can go to that workshop with the Wastewater Management Association of America, because in fact it's a water resources issue that you're working on. So I do think getting supportive leadership is really an important part.
I'll just say something that's kind of occurred to me. I run this institute here at Penn State, and one thing that I thought about was that here at Penn State, we have a lot of big grants, big projects that are led by senior people. And one thing I've just noted, and one thing that has bothered me, is the fact that here's this beautiful mentoring opportunity that we're not taking advantage of. So we have new faculty coming in, and these people have established, I'll include myself, established programs. And how do we get these junior people to learn from those, right? So what I did as part of my institute, I'm still trying to figure out whether it's been successful or not. I think maybe it's going to take some time, is I had some seed grant, I had a seed grant competition where somebody from an established, because usually when you have an established program, your budget's already allocated. So you can't bring in a new, assistant professor because they weren't there when you put together a proposal. But I had the seed grant competition where I say, we'll give money to the early career faculty member for a grad student or something to connect with these established projects, so that they can make those relationships, connect to that, learn from these large interdisciplinary teams is by being a member of it, and also getting exposed to agencies. In my case, my team presents to different agencies all the time. So if I'm able to bring in some of these early career people at my institution to kind of connect to my team and have that opportunity, that's great for them. So we funded two early career people that way. That might be, I don't know if that's something that institutes within a university do, or whether any seed grant at a university could open it up to allow that type of mentoring opportunity to happen. But just the fact that you have at any university people who have been successful, and losing that mentoring opportunity, we got to figure out a way to connect the early career with these senior people who had this experience.
Thanks. And I think that dovetails really nicely into another question, which was specifically for Suzanne. Tom asks, can you give a specific example of a very successful research project taken in collaboration with an Indigenous community, and what were the outcomes?
Okay. Yeah, I mean, I can talk about the research I did. I thought it was very successful, so that was good. And the difference that we did on our project is we did research on the reservation itself. We were one of the first teams to gain approval from this various Indigenous communities to work with their students on their land, answering the questions they had. And previous work with Indigenous communities always had bringing Native students to, like, Purdue. So I'm bringing them hundreds of miles away from their home, or bringing them to a large institution, and they're out of place, and they're not doing research on their land. They may be research that's connected to their place, but it wasn't on their land. And I thought that our outcomes were really successful in showing that you could build a relationship and build trust enough that the community, and they have a tribal college there, that we could go onto their land and do research in partnership with them. So I thought that was an amazing outcome. And I'll say from that, and we talked about relationship building, I did that project like 20 years ago now. And from there, I developed this with the Geoscience Alliance in partnership with Diana Delbotten at the University of Minnesota, bringing in Native American geoscientists into a community, working together across the United States. And because of that, Purdue also got a grant to help fund, from the Sloan Foundation, to help fund Native American graduate students in STEM. And so you cut, like, the bigger outcome of all this little work that I did in northern Minnesota was that we're developing more Indigenous scholars. And because of that, and they're being trained, at our universities, earning masters and PhDs in the STEM disciplines. Well, now that's a great person to reach out to if you want to do research in their community. They have their traditional knowledge and how they grew up in their community, their traditional ecological knowledge of their land, and they have the Western science. They've been trained through an R1 institution. And so there's one person to bring into your groups that can help you bridge that gap between academia and Indigenous knowledge. So kind of a roundabout answer, but I think there's been a lot of work done 20, 30 years ago. We laid a lot of foundation to where we're at today, where we have a lot more Indigenous scholars. And I'll say at Purdue, the Sloan Foundation that we have next to Arizona, we graduate the most Native American students in the STEM disciplines because of the Sloan Foundation grant that we partnership with Arizona and Montana. So looking for those students.
Thanks. And if I can ask a follow-up question on that, when you started with that relationship building, way back when you made the first, reach to somebody, did you have this bigger vision in mind? Did you think in 20 years, we're going to be bringing in lots of Native American students, we're going to have a whole program, this is where we're going? Or did that happen, you sort of organically, and you figured it out as you went along?
Yeah, it happened organically. And I never dreamed we'd be where we are today with this program. I just knew for myself personally that kind of earning my PhD, how I could give back to the community, or, you know, give what did I want to do? What impact did I want to make by earning my PhD? And that was working with Indigenous communities. And so my training, I'm an atmospheric scientist. So how could I bring that back and make an impact? So that was kind of my whole idea. And I just reached out to the director of the Native American Center at this small college in northern Minnesota, and it grew from there. I luckily reached a very important person. Didn't know, I knew his background, but I didn't realize the influence he had throughout actually the entire Native community in the United States. He's part of the initial AIM movement. You know, the sit-in at Alcatraz when the Bureau of Indian Affairs was led by white men in the 70s. So that whole takeover happened. And I understood about that. I didn't realize the person I reached out to was like the head of that. So I lucked out, right? And got a very influential person who has helped guide me through the work I did for those first 10 years. And I wanted to dovetail on to what Karen and Nancy were saying about, you know, getting funding through programs. Is I was very open with my NSF officer. I was one of the first Native partnerships that she funded, and she was very willing to learn from us as well. And I think I have seen a change in NSF over the last 20 years of how we look at broader impacts. And speaking, you know, to Jessica's question, you need someone on that panel that's going to speak up. I mean, I'm always fighting for broader impacts and how the researchers tie that into the rest of their work. So I think, I know I have seen a difference. I'll just say in NSF, and I know my program officer used to talk to other program officers, the importance of diversity and inclusion in grants and getting the appropriate funding in a grant to actually be successful in your relationship building and broader impact. So we've come a long way from what it was.
Maybe I can just tag along on that if you don't mind, just to say, you know, this is an important time in our country, at least from the point of view of working for one government agency, because I think that diversity, equity, inclusion, accessibility, as well as equity, those two things meaning different things within the context of the executive orders that we're all working against, towards equity being how we at NASA work and share all of our resources with no barriers. Everyone has an equitable access to, and for NASA Earth Sciences, that's our data, but also our grants and our procurements, and looking at where we have barriers to inclusion across all of the ways we interact with the rest of the world. But then the DEIA piece is really around how we're bringing our next workforce, and does our workforce currently look like ourselves, you know, like the rest of the United States, and how do we get there from here? And so I just think it's a great thing to think about this overlay of the relationships and the interdisciplinary nature, and the, you know, the cross diverse, as we all know, diverse thought leads to innovative thought, and there's really great value in your team to having that diversity. And so I think as we think about the relationships undertone, which is kind of gone across this, I just think I encourage everyone to really push hard for these kinds of relationships. I mean, like next week, we're having a equity stakeholder town hall from NASA with the administrator, and I'll be in the background somewhere. But really, so like, I mean, like you really have a lot of attention towards trying to make a difference right now with Indigenous as well. And so thanks, Suzanne, to hear about all your great work that you're doing there. I think it's really important, and to continue. I just think it's a good time to push hard. With the challenge, maybe I'll make the challenge. I put this equity and environmental justice solicitation out really quickly. I reached out to, and what I had a tribal friend who is a good cultural bridge between Western and tribal. He helped me share the solicitation, but we got very few proposals from our Indigenous colleagues, because honestly, there they're not in that culture, and that's not their relevant way of thinking. And so I think there is a challenge to even having the right way to engage those scientists in a way that makes sense. So I just want to share that.
Yeah, thanks for bringing that up and acknowledging that there's a challenge. I think that's helpful, you know, for all of us to hear, because especially those of us who are early career and struggling with how to do it. You know, speaking of mentorship, it really helps to hear other people say, yeah, we've been struggling with this too. Are there any other questions from people? Go ahead. I'd see a lot of people weren't able to stay for the full 2 hours. I know it's a long workshop, but any remaining questions? I'm wondering from, oh, go ahead.
Danielle, so I put a question in a chat box, particularly for Karen, but I think we have talked a lot about what to do, what should be done in the proposal writing, but everybody probably at some point will receive this bummer email like, thank you for submitting your proposal. Unfortunately, we can't. So I picked Karen, not because I believe she know more about it than other people, just because I know Karen longer than the other speakers. And I think I started working with her as early as in 2011 or 2012. At the beginning, I saw her as a shiny, successful team leader, but not until today, she told us about her personal funding experience, like for her first 10 years. I think we're on that first 10 years exactly right now. And so I involved in some proposals, didn't end up with successful funding. And I'm wondering, what do you do with it? So do you just give it up or keep working on it for a different team or try some other funding sources? So every proposal takes a lot of energy and time to put up with. So what do we do after that? Thank you.
That's a really good question, Jing. Yeah, I had a lot of that, through my career. A couple things. I think I learned pretty quickly to be thinking about ideas that could be sold to different programs. And now I'm trying to be careful what I say, because Nancy, I think, is spot on when she says you need to read the solicitation and propose for that solicitation. But a lot of times you might have an idea that, you know, if you mold it in a certain way and reframe it, it could be very applicable to, you know, multiple different programs. So you don't want to take one proposal. So I'm trying not to say have one proposal that you just shop, you know, you just kind of put in each one of these things. You can't do that simultaneously anyway. But, you know, the whole idea is that sometimes when you're doing work on urban landscapes, you know, maybe this solicitation, if we kind of focus on this research question versus that research question, because what you're doing has multiple dimensions and different research questions. So that's always a good thing to think about, is that you don't want to, you know, it's to put a lot of work into a proposal that, you know, may have a small chance of getting funded, and it's really not in your wheelhouse, that if you it's not within your research program necessarily, that you could ask a different question and then it would be applicable to something else. So that's one thing. The other thing that I know that we did was you get the review comments back, but sometimes they're not very, sometimes they're helpful. Of course, you need to read them, but sometimes you're reading it and going, well, everyone seemed to be so positive. Why didn't I get it? And that's when you need to call the program manager and as a debrief, who are always happy to kind of give you some of the context to say, yeah, it was good. Or maybe it is, yeah, it was great. It was there. It was fundable, but we just didn't have enough money. And that would tell you, give it another shot and at a later time. But then if it's like, well, to be honest with you, it really didn't fit the solicitation. You know, I think Nancy's point about making sure you're proposing something that's for the solicitation, it could be that. And sometimes you don't get that sometimes from the review comments that you get back. So sometimes getting these this chance to kind of get a debrief from the program manager is helpful. Again, I'd like to hear Nancy's thought though on whether that's good advice or not.
Yeah, Karen, no, I think that's great. I think that the advice of having the kernel of a core of an idea that can move towards different places is great. I have seen shopped proposals. They're pretty clear. And so, you know, I think, again, read the solicitation, respond to the solicitation. But if you've done a lot of the background work, then, you know, it's a rewrite. It shouldn't be as much as starting over, right? But do rewrite it, please. Don't just change the title. I have seen it. And then I do completely agree that asking for the debrief is helpful. Having those coming up right now with a couple, because you know, people are disappointed, right? It's really important, at least in the NASA world, we have what we call programmatic considerations too, right? And so it may be research that was great, but, you know, programmatically, it wasn't as relevant for the needs that we're trying to address, wasn't ready for the needs. And so I can just tell you that we manage these, because it's a cross-disciplinary panel to understand international development, as well as the science, as well as the current state of that use of that knowledge for decisions and actions. There's a lot of things that we expect both the proposer and the panelists to know, to be able to do. And so it definitely, I agree completely. Give the call. It's awkward. I can tell you it's awkward on my side. I say a little prayer every time I send those emails, to both for the yeses and the nos, because it's really hard. And I know how much work it is to write a proposal. And so it's just really hard to say no. And then if these are folks that you know personally, you know, it makes it all the harder. So give them a call. Say, hey, I want to learn. I've had two. I'll just tell you, I've just had two, right? One of them was like screaming. The other one was very polite. And guess which one is easier to address? So just be nice, even if you're really disappointed.
Yeah, the way to and just to follow up on that is to say, yeah, we were disappointed, but we're trying to learn from this experience, given that I'm an early career person. If there's any more insight you can give, because when I read these, they seem very positive. So we're just trying to figure out, I'm new to this, you know, how can we do things better so next time it would be successful? You know, that's how you kind of say it, rather than everyone was positive. Why didn't we get it? You know, but mainly say kind of, I would like to learn from this experience. That's kind of the way to frame it.
Lastly, I wonder if our speakers, do you guys have any questions for each other? You've been talking back and forth, so perhaps you've addressed everything.
I actually learned a lot from listening to Suzanne and Nancy. And I feel like maybe a curtain was pulled apart for me a little bit. So it's very, from hearing from their perspective is extremely helpful.
Yeah, and I want to thank you, Danielle, for pulling this together, because a little inside secret is us three speakers didn't talk till this morning, and I thought our presentations kind of dovetailed probably better than maybe if we would have actually thought about what each other was saying, and I think it came across as authentic, and we all talked about this relationship building, and so thank you, Danielle, for putting us together and having this panel.
Yeah, I now have a relationship now with Suzanne and Nancy that I will probably utilize, much to their dismay.
Yeah, no, I'll just add and say, yeah, for sure. I think that I came into this not knowing a whole lot. And so thank you, Danielle, for inviting me and getting this great exposure to the conversation and the good questions as well from the participants. So I do appreciate that. And, I guess the one question I would be interested in would be, at Purdue and Penn State, how are you working on diversity, equity, inclusion, and accessibility? Is there one thing you can say about that you think you're particularly proud of, that you think like you figured it out?
Oh gosh, yeah. And Suzanne, that's the reason why when you were talking, Suzanne, I learned a lot from this, and I feel like we are getting better here at Penn State, but we still have a long way to go. I know we do have a real focus on it now. for good reason. And our program manager wants to see more of this. And so, and it's not, and Suzanne's point is right. I think just too many people will go, oh, we got to check that box. Oh, somebody contact somebody over there for a quick letter. I've seen that more times than I'd like to admit, and that to me is not what we're after here. So I think people, the more that you can think about that before there's even a solicitation, like how am I going to do this in my own research program? We're giving a lot of thought to that right now. My program manager is actually Rob Nicholas has spent a lot of time thinking about DEI issues, and so we're trying to figure out ways now that the project is funded, so it's kind of a little bit after the fact, but we need to figure out ways to get that. And we do have a very nice, diverse team, but it certainly could be better. So yeah, I again, it's more on the mistakes than the successes. I think we have a way to go for me to say that we've been successful at that. I think we still have a long way to go.
Yeah, I agree with Karen. I think we all have a long way to go. But what is important is having that at the top levels of the university, focusing on, people focusing on diversity, equity, and inclusion. And I think for faculty, I'm a staff member now, and for faculty to realize that there's staff all across the institution doing this work. And I'm in engineering and women in engineering, and the university has put resources and funding into our program to be successful. We work with minority engineering, and then we have programs across all of our different colleges. So reach out to those individuals. They're the experts in what they do. You're the expert in whatever, your field in your academic field, but you can reach out across your institution to get help with like building diversity, equity, and inclusion into your grants. And, I love talking to faculty and sharing this information. And I think that's what's really important. And it's hard. And I understand, I used to be faculty and understand how hard it is, publish or perish or get those grants and all that, and all that focus that you have. And then the teaching on top of that. But just taking the time out to focus on diversity, I think is really important, and it will be beneficial in your teaching and in your grant writing and in the research that you do and the impact that you make. So we're all here. We're always willing to talk to anybody. Give us a call.
Yeah, so have that conversation earlier rather than at the last minute. I think that's something we all need to do.
And you didn't ask me, but I'll jump in because we've got several institutions here actually in Glassnet, and I'll mention, so at UNH, one thing I've appreciated, and we don't know if we're successful yet, we just started a Justice, Equity, Diversity, and Inclusion Committee at our research institute. And importantly, our institute is mainly externally funded research faculty. You actually have 3 of our JEDI committee members on this call right now. And it had to be part of our jobs. Like that became really important, at least I think for many of us, and Jessica or Sophia can jump in here too, but to say this is now part of our job description is working on this. And that includes funding, and that includes meetings, and that includes part of what we see our mission is as research faculty, and that's supported by the Institute. As I said, I think it's too early days to know if we're actually have been successful in what we're doing, but in order to at least try, we had to redefine our jobs and bring all the pieces that go with it to have this DEI piece to it.
Thank you. It's really important. Yeah, that whole being a part of your job thing is important, because rather than other duties as assigned, which is how it often ends up. And then when you get busy, it drops. So
Exactly. And I think part of what we hope we will be for other researchers, I think to Suzanne's point and maybe Karen's point as well, is try to help others in our research institute figure out how to do what we're talking about, which is how to get these pieces into their proposals in the right way that we're all just discussing here today. So we hope to be a resource for others and connect them to the resources, as Suzanne says, across the university. I think that that brings us to the end of this workshop. So thank you all again. This has been incredibly productive and I appreciate it.